So, I've been thoroughly enjoying my time with Stalker 2. It's easily one of my favourite games of the year, but like any game, it's not without its issues, and I'm not just talking about bugs, performance, or unfinished features.
Cover me, brothers! I'm hit!
I want to focus on something different, something I haven't heard spoken about much, and that's about some of its balancing and execution of ideas. These are areas where I feel like the experience falters, even when everything technically works, or will work, as intended. Originally, I included these points in my full Stalker 2 review, which will be coming soon, so make sure to subscribe to catch that. Now, to be perfectly clear, this isn't me saying Stalker 2 is bad or pointing fingers at the devs. They did an amazing job, and I'm thoroughly enjoying the game, in fact. As I was playing, I just couldn't stop thinking about what some of its systems were missing and how they could be improved. Of course, not everyone will agree, and that's totally fine. And I'd actually love to know your thoughts on it, so let me know in the comments where you stand in all this.
Calm down, Sherba.
Anyway, with that out of the way, let me preface by saying that I played about 90% of Stalker 2 on Veteran because I wanted an immersive, challenging experience focused on survival, both in combat and in the quieter moments between firefights. Because to me, that is the essence of the Stalker experience. Not just an RPG or an FPS, but at its core, I feel it's a survival exploration game. Like an open-world Metro Exodus. A world where every second of combat feels like a fight for your life, and every day outside of it is a battle to keep going. And much of what I'm about to go over is based on this core idea. And that's also what makes one of my biggest gripes with the game so frustrating, which is the hunger and sleep systems. In a setting like Stalker, these should feel like critical mechanics, something that constantly keeps you on edge, planning ahead and adapting. But they just don't. You need to eat, and you need to sleep. But food in Stalker 2 is so abundant it feels like you're raiding a Christmas Eve fridge every time you enter an old shack, even with mods to reduce loot spawns. Now, you might be thinking, so what, isn't that a good thing? Well, let me explain. My question is, when should eating be included in a game? To me, it typically serves one of two purposes, immersion or gameplay. Take Red Dead Redemption 2 for example. Eating there feels immersive, it's part of the experience. Putting up a camp, sitting around a fire and frying up some of the game you just hunted and munging on it with some beans, it really pulls you into the experience. And on the other hand, as in most games, eating serves a gameplay function, whether it's healing, stat boosts, or managing food as a resource. And Stalker 2 feels like it has the perfect opportunity to strike a balance between the two. The idea of scrounging through a ruined world, scooting and shooting away to find a scrap of unirradiated food to keep yourself alive sounds amazing. But the reality is, the zone in Stalker 2 has enough sausage and tuna in it to open a deli. So what about immersion then? Sure, it is immersive the first few times, but then it just gets kind of annoying. You're constantly eating every few minutes, and inventory weight is precious. You don't want to have to waste it on food for a quick animation. And no point hoarding it either, because everyone else in the world knows how plentiful it is, so don't expect to rake in profits off a food monopoly like a supermarket after COVID. The way I see it, this could have been a core gameplay mechanic that added immersion in its own right, scavenging old houses for scraps to avoid starving, keeping your hunger in check so it doesn't affect combat, or, as the game claims, attract mutants, which is a mechanic I've yet to really feel in action. Instead, I actually stopped bothering to check most buildings unless I knew there was a stash, because most were filled with the same items: food, ammo, some medkits, and maybe a grenade or two. And even with mods to reduce loot spawns, I had hundreds of each in my stash. So yeah, I guess eating can just be for immersion, but then don't make me do it every 5 minutes. People in real life also have to shit, piss, and clip their toenails, but no one is asking for that animation every 10 minutes.
He asked you to wipe his ass!
So here's how I think hunger should function in a game like Stalker 2. Picture this. The effects of hunger are much more pronounced. Your stamina drops, and your growling stomach actually does attract mutants. But you only need to eat about twice a day or so to stave this off. On top of this, food becomes incredibly scarce, primarily found in old houses, petrol stations, or abandoned shops. This scarcity would force you to keep a close eye on your food supplies, making it feel like a vital resource in this desolate world, something that really makes sense. Now imagine finding a bit of extra food. Suddenly you feel the sense of relief and confidence, knowing you can venture further into the unknown without risking starvation. Or you could sell it for a hefty profit because everyone got to eat. That's the kind of experience I think Stalker 2 should aim for, where survival outside of combat is just as critical as surviving in it, and it should feel like an active challenge, not just a routine of pesky animations. Because as it is now, food isn't scarce. If right now in the game I found 100 pieces of bread, energy drinks, medkits and grenades, I might nab 5 of each and then leave the rest because anything more isn't worth the wait. Yet realistically, in the Stalker world, such resources could bring a new kingpin to the block. And that's where the immersion falls flat for me. I just feel resources should be limited for gameplay and immersion, but they're not. They should be valuable and tied to your survival, but they're not. And all this goes for sleeping as well. Apparently 1 energy drink a day is all it takes to never sleep again. Now, I fully understand not everyone agreeing with these changes and plenty liking it as it is for now, and that's fair enough, that's what difficulty options are for. Which brings me on to my next topic. As previously mentioned, I began the game on Stalker and turned the game to Veteran after feeling like the survival aspects were not as prevalent as I expected. But does Veteran fix that? No, not really. Veteran basically just makes the economy harder and enemies tankier, and that's in a game where many of the mutants already have the constitution of a bank vault. I think a lot of devs take the approach that a harder difficulty just means dialing player damage down and enemy health up. And in some games, sure, that works fine, but in Stalker 2, Veteran just did not achieve the kind of difficulty I was aiming for. Again, I ended up modding it so that NPCs did a ton more damage, and play damage was dialed back up to the base damage that it is in Stalker difficulty. Because a fight in Stalker 2 feels like it should be strategic and tense, able to change at any moment by a well-placed bullet by either side, because that's how reality is. But that's just not the kind of experience that Stalker 2 is at the moment. Which ties into my next point, because another thing I really wanted from Stalker 2 was the heart-pounding thrill of looting buildings. Entering in the dark, unsure of what dangers might be lurking around any or every corner. But right now, 90% of the time when you step into a building, it's eerily empty. If there are enemies, you'll either hear them long before you find them, or they'll detect you 50 meters away between 2 walls and come charging and screaming out. Usually both of these cases. But the only times you ever get ambushed are in those scripted moments where enemies spawn based on a specific trigger, which is very rare. Even then, they make a lot of noise, so they never really get the drop on you. I mean, here's a perfect example of that. Still, that was more than most buildings, and even just a bit more of that would be nice. Essentially, what I'm after is the thrill of entering a building crouched and quiet, checking every corner before edging deeper, sometimes turning to find an unaware enemy who you now have the chance to sneak past or get the jump on. But after nearly 100 hours of Stalker 2, I've never really had either of those experiences. And there are 2 reasons for this. First, the bar underneath the compass turns red as soon as combat begins, which means as soon as an enemy is aware of you. There's no chance to be surprised because you're always made immediately aware the second something detects you. And you can turn off the compass in the settings, or like I did, mod the red bar away, which definitely improves things, and I highly recommend doing that regardless of the difficulty. And I made a video going over it and some other nice mods, so I recommend checking it out to enhance your own experience. But even with those tweaks, the second issue still remains, and that's that stealth, a critical part of creating suspense, is almost entirely broken. Almost never am I able to spot an enemy before they spot me, unless it's from a great distance. Otherwise, they'll always see you coming first, and when they do see you, red bar or not, they'll make sure you're aware of it too, charging around, flipping tables, gurgling phlegm or screaming, "He's here!" The only enemy you can kind of sneak up on are zombies, but they have the challenge rating of a toddler anyway. And as some small proof of this, I've never used my knife in my entire playthrough. I believe it actually has an assassination animation, but honestly, I'm not sure because I've never had the chance to use it. And if I do manage to sneak up on anything, I'm not getting that close, they're just going to get a silenced bullet instead. So, what does all of this mean for the Stalker experience? Well, it means that Stalker 2 is, for 90% of the game, no more scary than, I don't know, Stardew Valley. And right, fair, maybe some people aren't after that kind of experience from Stalker, but then Stalker 2 without suspense feels contradictory to the atmosphere it works so hard to build. The zone is decrepit, filled with grotesque mutants, ruthless bandits, and unpredictable anomalies. The game sets up this dark, bloody, dog-eat-dog world, practically telling you to brace yourself for terror at any moment. And yet, I'm genuinely far more on edge delving into a cave in Minecraft than going into a pitch-black basement in Stalker 2. And that doesn't seem right. Even Bloodsuckers, a staple mutant of the zone that literally turns invisible, won't sneak up on you because it'll scream like an underpaid teacher before it attacks. The thrill just isn't there. And don't get me wrong, I'm not asking for a full-blown horror game. I'm not much of a horror fan, but I do want to feel some tension in exploring, some thrill in the unknown. And that sense of excitement disappeared after a few hours when I realized the game systems simply don't allow you to be surprised. It's like watching a thriller with someone who tells you before any surprises or jump scares. And while you could blame a lot of this on A-Life not being fully implemented yet, leaving much of the zone lacking the unpredictability and diversity it's meant to have, as I mentioned, this is all especially noticeable in buildings. And I'm not sure if that's an area A-Life is intended to change much. And even if it does, as long as the game and enemies continue to announce their presence the moment they spawn, that thrill is still going to be incomplete. And this brings me on to my final point. But before we do dive into that, if you've enjoyed the video and discussion so far, drop a like to let me know you'd like to see more content like this. And also, subscribe to stick around for my upcoming videos. I post at least once a week, and your support really makes all the difference. So now, let's imagine a scenario where enemies are sneakier and more present in the deep, dark spaces. You sprint into a basement and suddenly come face to face with a mutant. Has your lack of caution screwed you over? No, not really. Why? Because all you have to do is jump onto a box, and now those terrifying bloodsuckers are as threatening as cockroaches. At first, I saw this use of elevation as a clever survival strategy, using the environment to stay out of a mutant's reach. NPCs will still shoot you, of course, but for mutants, any elevated surface is essentially a cheat code for safety. But as the game went on though, it started to wear thin. What began as a tense and thrilling way to deal with mutants turned into a repetitive exercise in exploiting their behavior. It stopped feeling like I was fighting monsters and started to feel like I was just outsmarting their AI. Realistically, many of these mutants should be able to scamper up anything the player can, or just barrel through the obstacles to knock you off. And that would fix the issues, making high ground a temporary reprieve for healing, reloading, and getting your bearings, rather than a guaranteed safe zone. But as it stands, the moment you're up on something, you're invisible, depending on the enemy. Now, to its credit, the game tries to counter this by having mutants retreat into cover when you exploit this strategy, but it's easy to bait them back out. Just hop down for a second, lure them out into the open, then jump back up and take your free shots. Rinse and repeat, and the thrill of mutant encounters fades fast. But this doesn't apply to all mutants. The ones that have ranged attacks, like poltergeists and controllers, can still get you, but they're not that scary to get face to face with anyway. Well, actually it's preferable because a shotgun will alt F4 them pretty quick anyway. The true exceptions to this strategy are Snorks and Chimeras, because they can jump and often reach the player. For that reason, I actually feel Snorks are one of the best enemies in Stalker 2. They're thematically perfect, creepy, fast, and relentless, and they can get you even on higher ground, which makes every encounter tense and unpredictable. And this kind of balance is something that so many other enemies in the game are missing. Snorks still put me on edge every time I fight them, and they're one of the few enemies that can still kill me regularly. I can't say that about most other enemies, which have become more of an annoyance than a threat because their behavior is so easy to counter. If more enemies were designed like Snorks, with weaknesses sure, but no way to completely neutralize them, then the game would be far more thrilling. Alternatively, a quicker fix could be simply adding more enemies or tougher encounters. For instance, when you do face something like a Chimera, it's usually just one, and on its own, it's not too hard to deal with. Unless there's nothing to jump on, and then it's a hell of a challenge. And bloodsuckers do start to appear in small groups, which is great in theory, but they're still useless against a waist-high box. So where does all that leave Stalker 2? It's a game with immense potential and moments of brilliance, but it often undermines its own atmosphere and tension with mechanics that just feel too safe or exploitable. Small tweaks like improving stealth, limiting resources, or reworking AI behavior a bit, which might come with A-Life, could drastically elevate the experience. Of course, there are plenty that like it as it is, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's why if these changes did come, I think it'd be better under difficulty settings, perhaps customizable, adjustable difficulty settings. But don't get me wrong, this video has just been a platform for discussion around elements I feel could use improvement to enhance the soul of Stalker 2. What I'm not trying to do is saying that the game is bad or that the devs screwed up or anything like that. I have been thoroughly enjoying it, and I do not believe any of these issues ruin the experience or prevent it from being one of the standouts of the year. It's just that these are some simple things that I believe could make the experience even better. For now though, I've just relied on some mods to get closer to the kind of survival thriller I really wanted to see from Stalker 2. And if you want to know the mods I'm using, check out my Stalker 2 mods video to find the best ones to enhance the zone. But anyway, what about you? Am I making any sense with any of this? Have you had similar experiences, or is it all just me? Let me know in the comments because I read them all. Well anyway, thanks for watching, and until next time, catch ya.